That's right.
Bringing you the stories of sport professionals across the region. My name is Lily Gould.
And I am Ryan Gildersleeve.
And this is the Northwest Center for Sport podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Northwest Center for Sport, led by Director Sean Dolan, is committed to advancing knowledge and opportunities for students to allow them to lead the sport industry into the future.
You can follow the Northwest Center for Sport podcast by following at CW_NWCS on Twitter or by looking up Northwest Center for Sport on LinkedIn.
And, just like that, folks, my name is Ryan Gildersleeve. I am the sports broadcast coordinator over here at 88.1 The Berg. I also operate on our news team as a reporter.
My name is Lily Gould, and I'm part of the Northwest Center for Sport Communication and Marketing team. And, well, Ryan, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Absolutely, folks. We are very excited to be introducing our Northwest Center for Sport podcast guest today, a current sports writer and editor for the Associated Press. He is a 2000 Central Washington University graduate and part of the Northwest Center for Sport Advisory Board. I am very pleased to welcome Tim Booth.
Thanks, guys. That was a very nice introduction. I appreciate that.
We try.
Yes, we do. Thank you for joining us. Is there anything you kind of want to introduce about yourself first before we begin?
Not really, other than you could probably throw on there that I'm a to-be Central Washington University parent of a student, as my son has decided he's going to go to Central starting next year.
Sweet.
There we
And
go.
he very well might be in the same program that you guys are in.
Nice.
So we'll see how all that plays out.
Got some breaking news here on the Northwest Center
I
for
know,
Sport
right?
podcast.
Exactly.
Putting it out there.
It's like Bronny James.
I'm not sure if Dr. Dolan even knows that yet. Actually, I think he does. But anyway.
It's going to be a surprise for him. He's going to be into that, getting him all up in the business here.
He's been a very active recruiter, so he has done his part in making sure my son is fully interested in going into the program and seeing everything that it has in store for him. So
That's what Dr. Dolan does.
That's exactly
That's
what he does.
exactly what he does. That's what he did for me. So it's great. Well, then we'll go ahead and start with the interview and get into some questions for you. And then if you have anything to add on to any of the questions or anything, feel free to just go ahead and talk. So what was your journey after graduating from Central Washington in 2000?
Well, it feels like forever ago, which it kind of is at this point. It's 24 years. So after graduating, I had a really hard time finding a job in the Pacific Northwest. That was my goal, was to stay in the Northwest, and just could not find anything that fit. The market was, I was very specific. I was a journalism major. I wanted to be a sports writer. So I was very particular in what I was looking for, and ultimately that led me to have to go to California to find my first job. And it was, I tell the story that I got offered from two places on the same day. I got offered from a newspaper in Victorville, California, which, if anyone knows where Victorville is, that's out in the middle of the desert. It's east of Palm Springs. It's about 1,000,000 degrees there during the summer, and it's just, there's nothing really around. You're still like 2.5 hours from LA or 3 hours from LA. And I got offered from a newspaper in Victorville and Vacaville. And Vacaville was 30 minutes from Sacramento and 60 minutes from San Francisco. And that seemed a lot more enticing and enjoyable. And they were willing to meet my pay demand of getting $10 an hour for my first job out of college. So I moved to California. I worked down there for 3.5 years. My wife and I, at that time, she's a Central grad as well. She's the better Central grad. She has a bachelor's and a master's from Central. Her and I were kind of just tired of living down there, and she got a job back in Seattle, and so we moved back to Seattle. And then after about 3 or 4 months of sitting around and watching reruns of Beverly Hills 90210 and all sorts of movies on our whatever satellite package we'd gotten from a friend, I finally got a job, and it was with the AP. It was a very entry-level job, I was kind of doing the equivalent of what a college intern would do, is kind of how I described it. But I was getting benefits, and I was making a whopping, I think, $36,000 a year, which just sounded awesome after making, 22, 24, 26,000 a year for my first few years out of college. So, and that started the process. From there, it was everything kind of took off, in short order. And now I've been with the AP for 20 years, and I've had a pretty substantial career now with them.
Tim, I wanted to ask, going to, of course, we spoke about your time in California briefly there. I wanted to ask, growing up in Ellensburg, obviously you kind of mentioned your roots are planted here in the Pacific Northwest, and so I wanted to ask, what was the differences that you felt in your tenure reporting in California as opposed to what you've been able to do back home?
Oh, that's a good question. In California, part of it was at that time you were starting to see the growth of, the .coms, or the internet era, the digital age of what we know now as consuming news. And so there was a lot of growth, and newspapers were trying to figure out what was next to come. And I think 20 plus years later, they're still trying to figure out what's next. But at that time, there were a lot of people who were getting hired by, Silicon Valley organizations to come in and try and figure out how do you make news work on the internet. And so there was a lot of colleagues that I worked with who moved on to either bigger newspapers because they had to backfill because of people they were losing, or a few of them were moving on to opportunities at, some of these startups, these .coms that were just kind of getting their feet under them at that point. It didn't really affect sort of the day-to-day what I was doing because I was so focused on, I'm a sports writer, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, is I'm supposed to be writing about high school sports. I'm supposed to be writing about, some of the college stuff that we did, and we would do, pro stuff every now and then. And so that was really what my focus was, to where it's probably a detriment that I wasn't looking more at kind of what was outside and what else was going on within the industry at that time, because that sure was an amazing time of growth within the industry, and you could have got in on the bottom floor of some pretty cool ventures as they took off, if you kind of could foresee what was going to be coming down the road. So. But in terms of like my day-to-day kind of stuff that I did back then, it was, I'm going to this high school baseball game, and I'm going to this high school track meet, or I'm going to this high school basketball game, or I'm in the office and I'm taking phone calls and getting scores from coaches who would call in and stuff. Now I'm going to Seahawks games and Kraken games and Mariners games and that sort of thing. So it's in some ways it's kind of similar, and I think there's a lot of skills that I learned from that opportunity that have translated over to what I do now. It's just on a bigger, broader scale than what I was doing during that first job out of college.
Of course. And then, kind of reeling things back towards Central Washington just for a moment here, I wanted to ask, you spoke about your day-to-day operations a little bit there. Is there anything specifically that you picked up during your time at Central Washington that you feel like you still use to this day?
I think there was a lot of time management stuff that you just generally learn in college that that I still follow to this day. Like, one of my first quarters at Central, I had stupidly signed up for back-to-back 8, 9, and 10 a.m. classes. And the 8 a.m. class was in what was L&L, which obviously isn't there anymore or is being reconstructed. The 9 a.m. class was in Nicholson, and the 10 a.m. class was in Shaw-Smizer. So
wow.
I had to
That's a
bounce
walk.
It was to this day I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
I've been there.
Not surprisingly, I pretty regularly skipped one of those classes, which is probably why I got a D and had to retake it later on. But we'll leave that part behind. But just kind of learning how to manage time. And I think that's a big thing for all college students. I think at Central, it's, my era of Central, I think it was a skill that I really picked up, is like learning how to plan your day, learning how to manage your day in a way where you're having to balance your classes. When do you want to take your classes? How does work fit in with that? What is work exactly going to be, looking like? How do you project what that, how all those kind of pieces, how do you have a social life, within all of that? So that was one of the big skills that I really picked up at Central. And I think I'm not a great time manager, but I think it's something I'm good at. I'm good at planning. I'm good at scheduling. I'm good at looking at things and kind of being able to map out and figure out how it all needs to piece together. And I think I know that's a skill that I picked up during my time at Central. And I learned not to have 8 a.m. classes ever, ever, ever again. Because I think that was an 8 a.m. class in the winter too, which was just
man.
On top of all the stupid decisions, that was probably the stupidest thing.
Following you talking about your time at Central and the skills that you've taken away, could you walk us through some of your day-to-day routine about what you do, and then how do you use some of those skills today still?
So the beauty of my job is that no day is ever really the same. I'm not going to an office and I'm punching in. I'm not sitting at my desk all day. I kind of have free reign over how I build my schedule. There are sort of tentpole or very specific things that I know. Okay, I have to be at this thing. I have to be at this thing. I need to be at this game on Friday night. So this week I know I have to cover the Mariners on Friday night. Okay, so that said, I know that what my schedule needs to be based around that, and that's why I was saying I'm a really good scheduler, because I look at those things and I go, okay, I got to be here on this day, I got to be here on this day. How do I build the rest of my week out? So, for instance, yesterday I played golf. That was my work day. I went and played golf. It was awesome. Today I'm talking with you guys. Tomorrow I have a coffee meeting that's been on the books for quite a while. This weekend I'm working 2 of the 3 Mariners games, so that's kind of what my days will look like around that. A lot of it, because of the requirements of my job, a lot of it's based around when games are. And so, but this time of year, especially without having a hockey team in the playoffs right now, there's a lot of sort of freedom to kind of build the schedule the way I want to. We get into football season, it's totally different. My week is based entirely around what's happening on the weekend. If the Seahawks are home, if the Huskies are home, if the Cougars are home, everything is based around what that schedule looks like. If the Kraken last year, the Kraken were in the playoffs. So this time last year, my entire schedule was based around the fact that they had playoff games, or they would have, interviews of it, on the off days. So it's a very fluid and a very irregular schedule. It kind of drives my family crazy, to be completely honest. But we've figured out ways over the years to make it work, because while it is irregular, there's a lot of flexibility within it. So there's a lot of times where I will, work 6 hours, and then back when my son was playing baseball, I would work 6 hours during the day. I would go off to his baseball game. I would come home and I would put in maybe a couple more hours later that night, kind of just to fill in the things that I had to get done for that day. So there's a lot of juggling. There's a lot of shuffling that goes on with it. It's very rare for me to have a Monday through Friday week. Sometimes that does happen, but that's just the nature of what the job requires and what it all entails.
So kind of just wrapping up with what we've got for our Central Washington kind of centered questions to ask you. I wanted to ask, one thing that we mentioned earlier was your being on the Northwest Center for Sport Advisory Board, and I just kind of wanted to ask what it is that position entails for you, and what it is that you do for the program.
You want the honest answer, or you want the correct answer? Because the honest answer is I've been on the board for less than a year, and I still don't know entirely what I'm supposed to be doing. But
Fair.
I mean, I joke with that, but I mean, ultimately, what it is it's providing some real world feedback for Dr. Dolan, Dr. Rolfe, others in the program about kind of what we're seeing within the industry. Because it's a really cool mix of people that are on that board. You have some people who are working in professional sports. You have some people who are working in at the high school level. Some people who are working at the collegiate level, and everyone's able to look at it through a different prism and bring some feedback and some of what they're seeing back to the instructors, so that they know what they're teaching and what they're providing for students at CW is, kind of where the industry is at or where it's going right now. So it's a really unique and I think good mix of people that are part of that board. Sometimes we give we'll do reviews of applications for student trips or experiences like that, or we'll just give some constructive feedback on resumes or cover letters, things along those lines. So it's basically just being a resource. Ultimately, a lot of us have at this point a fair amount of experience in the quote unquote real world, but I think it's all from a place of just trying to help the students to understand more, to maybe have a leg up on maybe where we were when we went through school and we're trying to figure out what our careers and our paths were going to look like. I didn't have many mentors that I could really turn to who are already in the field or already in the industry when I left Central, because that was just the way it was. So if we can be any sort of networking resource for the students, that's, at the end of the day, I think that's ultimately what we're the goal of it is. Being on this board is just being there to help. And maybe we hear something and maybe it turns into a job lead. Maybe we just pass along some good advice along the way. But it's something that I was on the Alumni Association board for 8 years, and almost immediately Dr. Dolan pulled me onto this board, and I'm so happy that I still get to have an opportunity to be connected with the university and be connected with students and try and help in this way.
You were just talking about the Alumni Association Board. So even though that you're not on it anymore, if you want to talk about what you kind of did beforehand about that and like how it kind of played into the Northwest Center for Sports, if they worked together, if they didn't, if it was separate, and how that was for you and your experience on there.
So my time on the Alumni Association Board was very it was a lot of ups and downs, to be completely honest, just because of things outside of our control that happened. When I started on the Alumni Association Board, it was sort of in a mode of transition. It was coming back from kind of they were really trying to revamp the and sort of bring back that connection the alumni had to the university. So there was a lot of change that was happening. At that time, when I was brought on the board, there was a lot of legwork that the director at the time, Bob Ford, did to really do a lot of great work in sort of reconstructing the foundation of it. And so that led into, things that we did, like the Alumni Plaza at Tomlinson Stadium. That was probably the biggest accomplishment that we had during my time on the board. Was we kind of helped push that project across the finish line and created some funding for it and kind of got it to where, Tomlinson's now a nice little stadium, kind of looks the way it's supposed to look. So that was a kind of the feather in the cap thing that we did during my time on the association board. But we also had some setbacks. Bob ended up leaving at one point. Scott Wade, who was the director of university relations, passed away suddenly, or VP of university relations. He suddenly passed away during that time, and Scott was an incredible person and an incredible resource for Central, and I think we're still to this day missing what he brought to the university when he was there. And then COVID hit. And it's like, oh, now we can't really do anything for the better part of 2 years. So all those things kind of happened the latter half of my time on the association board. So it was natural sort of to roll into doing something else once my time was up. And they do partner, the Northwest Center for Sport and the Alumni Association do partner on events like Mariners Night, which obviously just happened
Yes.
at T-Mobile Park and was a huge success, it looked like, this year. So there is some overlaps there still, but yeah, I'm happy now to have just one board or this board to focus on right now.
Yes. Moving on to your business experience, being in the business as long as you have, what knowledge do you feel that you have acquired that only experience could have garnered for you?
Oh, good question. I think probably one of the biggest things is just how important relationship building and networking is within every industry you work in. I mean, my industry that I work in is so heavily based around who you know, who you have connections with, how you get along with them, just how you foster those kind of connections with people. Because whether it's me trying to get a story, or it's me trying to help someone with a job opportunity, or just get information in general, it's those kind of relationships that eventually lead to having those pieces of news or job links or whatever it might be that come your way. So you hear people all the time harp on networking for college students, and it's true. I mean, networking is a huge part of a skill that you should learn while you're in school. You learn it on a different way, I think, in college, because you're learning it from your peer group, whereas so you're around a bunch of 18 to 21-year-olds or 18 to 22-year-olds for the most part, and that's who you're networking or learning that skill through. When you get out in the real world, you might be 23 and your best connection or your best networking or your best relationship professionally might be with someone who's 45. And how do you communicate with them on that level? Or it could be you're 45 like me, and one of my best connections is 64. How best do I foster that relationship? How best do I communicate with them? How do we work together to get to where we're helping each other out in a professional sense? So it's a skill that you can start the process of learning how to do in college, absolutely. But it's truly a skill that once you get out into the job market and get out into your professional life, that you truly learn how to do it, because you're suddenly having to deal with people outside of your peer range. And how do you make those relationships work? How do you talk to someone? How do you create a relationship with someone, a professional relationship with someone who is 37 and has 3 kids at home? How do you communicate with them? How do you foster that professional development with them? So it's a great skill to start now, but you truly don't fully understand it until you get out into the real job world.
So it's kind of sticking into the same realm of marketing, or I guess not marketing, but more networking there. I wanted to ask, how collaborative does coverage become in your realm? Because obviously, working in Seattle, it's one of those things where we've got a select number of teams, and I wanted to ask, say, like, the Mariners have something going on, something's brewing there. Are you communicating back and forth with someone like, say, Ryan Divish to make sure that all of this information's coming up at the same time, or what does that all look like?
Yeah, so we it's a mix of things. So you communicate with your colleagues that you are in the industry with, absolutely, and we are very fortunate here in Seattle that we have I'm fortunate. I'm really fortunate, but as a whole, here in Seattle, we have a very collaborative group of sports media around here. We talk a lot. If we hear something's up, we might talk to each other about, hey, have you heard about this? Or, hey, are you hearing what's going on here? Hey, what about this? That kind of thing. And we're willing to. Some people are very proprietary and very secretive about sharing information, especially if they have. And you understand it if it's like a big scoop or a big story or whatever. If someone has something, they're going to keep it to themselves. But sometimes, there's kind of rumors or little whispers out there, and you might bounce that off of somebody who, hey, you trust, and say, hey, are you hearing this as well, or what are you, I've had conversations about that related to the future of a basketball team in Seattle just in the last couple of weeks with some people that I trust who are in the media realm here. So you do have those conversations. You do talk with them. You do kind of say, okay, what are you hearing? You also have your people within the teams and within the industry that you will talk to and say, hey, is this legit? Is there something here? Should we be following up on this? Is this something, you guys want out there yet? You have, you kind of have some of those conversations as well. Is this coming down the pipe at some point? Those kind of things. So it's a mix of who you're talking to. You're talking to those directly involved with the teams. You're talking with your colleagues in the industry and sort of getting a feel for what they're hearing or what they're seeing. And then there will be outside sources too. Some of my colleagues who are, some of my AP colleagues who are more of the national kind of beat people who oversee some of the sports that we have to cover. They'll follow up and say, hey, because they talk to agents, they talk to other industry leaders, and they might be like, hey, we're hearing that this might be coming down with the Kraken, or we're hearing this might be something that's up with UW football, or whatever it might be. And so you'll have some of those conversations, and that's another piece or another area that you can get pull the information from along as you're going through the process.
Ryan, I'm going to steal your question because it came up just a second ago about a possible basketball team. So with the Sonics reportedly being slated to return to the NBA in the near future, do you feel an added sense of excitement knowing that a team that you once covered may be returning?
It's excitement and dread at the same time. It's excitement because I loved covering the NBA when the Sonics were here. I really enjoyed that, and that was one of the first sort of big opportunities I had with AP was to cover the NBA. So that part of me is excited about it, but I don't I just dread having even more on my plate. Like I've got a lot as is.
Yes.
And throwing an NBA team on there, as fun as it would be, or will be, it's going to happen. As fun as it will be, that is a lot more work, and so that part of it, I'm kind of like, okay, yay, NBA, but the professional side of it, yeah, I'm thrilled with the idea that sometime in the next 3 years, we'll probably have an NBA team back here.
And that's what you like to hear, Tim. I mean, that's something that, hey, I don't know if there's an ear in this room that didn't perk up when you said that. But I will say, I wanted to ask, you kind of spoke about, as we move forward, this next question that I got for you is kind of going to round out what we've got for our for the business experience part of this. And I wanted to ask, earlier you mentioned kind of talking with your sources, whether it be inside or outside, and I wanted to ask, how long does it take for you as a reporter and somebody who's really, I mean, the information that you report, many people are going to see as fact, and so with that, how long does it take for you to develop a relationship with these sources, and what does it take for you to really know that what you're getting from them is going to be accurate?
That's a great question. That's a terrific question, Ryan.
Thank you.
It takes a while. For some people, it takes a while. For others, it can be very quick and immediate. I have some sources that all it's taken really is a couple of meetings, a couple of conversations, and they become people that you can trust to go to for information. Others, it takes a lot longer, and you kind of have to break down some of the natural walls that are put up and based around, kind of either what their position is, or what the information they're trying to give out or not give out in some regards. Longevity certainly helps, especially if people have been in the same positions for a long time, or they've seen you around for a while. They know that you're someone that they can, trust, and also I think some of it too is, you have to show for me, it's showing my track record of, being right. Like, to your point, yes, you have to trust the information. The information that I put out is looked at as fact, and so I have to be right. I can't, like, the story always is in all media right now is to be fast, but be right. And it's especially true for us. Like, we want to get the stories out as quick as possible, but we got to be right. We can't mess things up, because we mess things up, it just diminishes our credibility. And especially a place like the Associated Press, we have really high standards. We're viewed in such a way, and so it's got to be right. That's the end all be all of everything. So, so back to how you develop your sources, it takes time. And for me, the one thing that I've found that really helps is you talk to your sources about things that have nothing to do with what the job is. You learn about, you do your little bit of homework, and you learn about who they are. You learn about where they came from, and you talk to them, hey, about their family, or about some of their background, or about things that are totally unrelated to what they do on a day-to-day basis. And you have to be open to talking to them about who you are as a person as well. And if you do that along the way, I think it humanizes both sides, and I think it allows those personal relationships to strengthen, so that when you do need to turn to them in a professional sense and say, hey, I need to talk to you about XYZ that's happened. Okay, now they might be more willing to talk to you, because it's beyond just the transactional, hey, I need this from you. You've now done the effort and created the relationship to where, hey, you actually know a little bit about them. You are willing to talk to them about their kids, or about their family, or about what their significant other does for a job. And when you're able to break that down and have that kind of personal relationship, I think it really helps in the process of, hey, I need this professionally right now. I need some information from you. And a lot of times I've found that they're more willing to do that. But and again, some of it can be can come together very quickly. But other times it takes a while, and it takes some effort on your end, and it takes some effort on the end of the person you're trying to get information from, to be open and be willing to create that personal relationship.
You're talking about building relationships. For you, in your experience, has it ever been like a challenge to build any relationships or get any connections for like a story, or just personal wise, and just going from there?
Yep, almost every day. There's people that give you a great example. There's a story I'm working on right now. I'm getting absolutely nowhere with it, but I went and sat down with this gentleman for 2 times. We talked for 2 hours off the record one time, and an hour on the record another time. Really good conversations. Felt like I was really getting somewhere with the direction I was headed on this story, and I needed to follow up on some stuff. And for the last 6 weeks, he has completely ghosted me. And I've tried multiple routes to sort of re-engage, and I don't know why all of a sudden this has happened. I have no idea why this is taking place. So there's a challenge right there of how do I get this person to re-engage with me and be willing to talk more, because yeah, the information he gave me was great, but I still got some more questions I need to ask, and I got some more stuff that kind of we need to talk about, because my original idea that we first sat down for has kind of pivoted a little bit. So you run into those situations. When I was younger, I still kind of had a little bit of imposter syndrome, and so I was very timid's the wrong word, but just certain authority figures within the industry that I was having to deal with. I struggled to sort of break down and create relationships, and some of that was I was fairly young. When I was younger, I definitely looked like I was about 5 years younger than I actually was, and that didn't necessarily help matters when you're dealing with a bunch of people who might have been within a sport or within an industry for 20, 30 years and who are in their 50s and are looking down at you in your 20s, or early 30s and thinking, well, you have no life experience. You haven't been through this. Why would I want to create a relationship and talk with you? So I ran into some of that, when I was early in my career. Fortunately, that has been less the case as years have gone by, especially now that I'm older than a lot of people that I'm dealing with, which is sometimes kind of troubling to think about. But so yeah, you run into those issues kind of every day about creating the network or making the connection or getting the information out of the person that you're trying to connect with. And it could be, you might not know the reason why. They could have a grudge against our company, or they could be pissed about something that I wrote 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and it's still hung with them for whatever reason. People have different reasons for getting hung up on things, and you never truly know until they finally are willing to engage with you and have the conversation as to why it may or may not be the case.
Gotcha. Following that as being one of your challenges, were there any other big challenges for you on your way to the position that you're in now?
Not terribly. I had some career choices that I've had to make along the way, whether I wanted to stick it out with where I was at. For many years, I was kind of the third guy on the totem pole within AP here in Seattle. And so that tested my patience for a while. I had an opportunity to move to Milwaukee at one point, which probably would have furthered my career at that time, but I didn't want to live in Milwaukee. No disrespect to Milwaukee,
Right.
but that didn't seem like where I wanted me and my family to be at that time. I turned down an opportunity to go to the Bay Area at one time because I didn't want to live 2 hours outside of San Francisco because that's the only place I could afford. There's been sort of some life choices like that along the way. But all in all, like the patience sort of has paid off, and has led me to where I'm at. There's things that obviously I would have liked to have done in my career by this point, which I haven't, but those are things that's somewhat out of my control. And so, but in terms of where I am and how I've gotten here, I think just being patient along the way was sort of the toughest thing. And then now it's kind of the inverse of that, is dealing with the craziness of everything. I had to be patient to get to this point, and then when I got to this point, it was like, oh, here's all this stuff that you have to do and figure it out. And so that's kind of the flip side of it. But yeah, for the most part, I don't have too many issues that I've run into along the way.
Tim, I wanted to ask, in the past you've talked about writing and how when you do write for people, specifically in sports, you're writing kind of for somebody who ideally wouldn't necessarily know too much about sports. With that, I wanted to ask, what do you find to be effective methods for driving interest in your stories, specifically if that's the scope that you're looking through?
Oh, good question. So human interest stories always play. If human interest is, the idea of the feature story is kind of, in my industry, is kind of no longer in vogue, I guess. But good human interest stories will always have a place within any sort of storytelling, whether it's, digital media, whether it's traditional print, whether it's video. There's always going to be a place for good human interest stories. So those are the ones that I try to look for first. Like, I'm taking game coverage out of the way, because game coverage is game coverage. Like,
Right.
the way we write a baseball story is the way we write write 162 baseball stories a year. Like, it just is the way it is. But outside of that stuff, it's the combo of good human interest, and then it's also what is something that is impactful to the broadest kind of audience. So, use this as an example. Right now, there's a huge issue with arm injuries in baseball. Massive issue with major league pitchers blowing out their ulnar collateral ligaments and having to have Tommy John surgery, and they're missing 2 years. And it's a pandemic. I mean, it's not a pandemic, but it's a major issue in Major League Baseball right now. And why is it happening? Well, it's because guys are throwing harder than they've ever thrown before. Why are they throwing harder than they've ever thrown before? It's because all of a sudden, at some point, someone realized that if you start training when you're 13, 14 years old to build up your arm to be able to throw at that speed, by the time you get to be 20, 21, 22, you'll be able to throw 99 or 100 miles an hour. So there's a lot of issues right now around that kind of training. Should 13, 14-year-olds be doing velocity training and potentially creating an issue with this magical ligament that's in your elbow that creates pitchers and causing the kinds of issues that we're seeing within Major League Baseball right now? Because there seems to be a link between the two things. That story, if I can ever pull it off, would impact a massive range, all the way from youth parents who have their kids in youth baseball right now, all the way up to people who have general interest in Major League Baseball, or massive Major League Baseball fans and are following what's going on with this issue right now. So it's those kind of stories. So it's good human interest, and it's stories that touch the broadest possible audience. Yes, you're going to have your day-to-day sort of feature stories that pop up that are kind of interest. So like last year, just on a random whim, DK Metcalf talked one day about how he's taken ASL, sign language lessons from a gentleman over Zoom who lives in Tennessee. I wrote that story that day. It was a great story. I got a bunch of kudos for it. It was like, hey, I had nothing planned for that day, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, I'm going to write this story, and it was 500 words, and everyone was happy with me for it. So sometimes those kind of stories will pop up, but for the most part, it's how can I tell either a good story about a person and tie in what they're doing athletically within that, or how can I tell a story that is going to touch the broadest possible audience within whatever the sport is or whatever the industry is.
As a writer, how do you make that connection to your audience when writing those types of stories? Like, do you use certain words? Do you do certain interviews? Like, what do you do that makes that connection to them?
That's a really good question. I don't know, actually. That's a great question. I think we do some looking at metrics about like what's drawing interest in terms of stuff we might have previously written.
Gotcha.
But I think all of it, a lot of it too, is just you kind of follow what the conversation is. I don't listen to a ton of sports talk radio, but I do have it on every now and then. You kind of hear what those guys are talking about.
Yes.
Or those people are talking about. You kind of listen to the conversations that you're having with your friends. What are they focused on? What are they? I have a text thread of guys I went to high school and college with who all they care about is the Seahawks draft. Like, so around the draft, it was like, okay, well, what are these guys interested in? What are they talking about? And so you kind of try and touch on things through that. But there's no sort of field research that I necessarily do of, what's the kind of story you'd be interested in, or what's kind of the thing that would drive you to come to our website and read it. And maybe that's a fault of us as an industry that we're not doing more of that. But I think also you kind of just learn over time, like, this is a good story. No matter what the kind of driving interest is or the factors behind it, you just know this is a good story. Great example. There was a woman who was a scout who played softball at Central, and she was hired as a full-time scout by the Mariners. This is probably 5-6 years ago. Her name is completely slipping my mind right now. But she was the first full-time female scout in baseball in like 40 years. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something along those lines. That's just a good story. Like, no matter what, that's a great story to go and tell. And so that's kind of my gauge, I guess, is if I think it's a good story and my boss thinks it's a good story, then I'm going to go try and tell it. And hopefully the audience out there is willing to engage with it and is willing to come and read it or come and watch it if it's a video thing, and spend the time, taking in whatever it is the story happens to be about.
Tim, funny enough, I actually did have I had a question kind of connected to that story that you mentioned there with, I believe that was, if I'm correct, that was Amanda Hopkins, the scout hired by the Mariners. Right.
Yep.
So I was reading that earlier, and I was kind of trying to come up with a few things. And one thing that came to my mind is, do you feel as though you kind of had like a leg up there when you were trying to report that story, in the sense that, of course, you had the same alma mater, and then, of course, with the locational thing, there wasn't too much land separating you guys. Did you feel you had a leg up there, or do you feel like that was something that anybody around the country could have kind of tapped into?
Amanda only agreed to do the story with me because I was a Central grad.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
So Amanda didn't really want it to be a big deal. But so she was doing very limited interviews about the fact that she'd been hired, and was working in this capacity. And so the Mariners, for several years, they've done a Women in Sports night and brought in several of their own women in prominent roles within the team or within the organization to talk about it, and then they will have some outside people come in as well. And for one of these years, I think it was 2018 maybe, Amanda was brought in to speak at this, and she was only going to speak at the event and talk to the people who had paid to attend. She wasn't going to do any interviews outside of that, and I was like, well, she's got, this is a big story. Like, this is a cool story. It needs to be told. It needs to be told on the broadest scale possible. That's sort of one of the advantages that I have as, with the AP, is we have the broadest reach of pretty much anybody who's out there within sports media. And so I said, look, if she sits down and talks with me, she's sort of talking with everybody at that point, and so, and then I was like, and, I'm a Central grad. And so that was a big part of the reason why she agreed to do that story, was because we were both Central alums.
Well, thank you.
So yes, it does help every now and then.
Yes. In the sports industry, what words of advice would you have for students in SMA or just here at Central looking to break into the world of sport media?
It's not easy. In some ways it's easier than it was when I was coming out of school, but it's also more difficult because while there's more sort of outlets that you can turn to try and get your foot into the door of sports media, the stability of a lot of them and the legitimacy of a lot of them is rather unstable. Like, you have your certain media outlets that are, the old standbys, or the ones that everybody knows of or has heard of. And then you have a lot of other ones that are, not to begrudge what some people do, but a lot of them are just sort of side hobbies and don't have the same level of legitimacy, or don't have the same standards, or allow, maybe don't live up to the same factual levels that others do. And in some ways that can get you in trouble if you're not, if you're just trying to find a place and not necessarily find the right place to get into the industry. So that's one thing, is you just have to be careful about what you're getting into if you are going outside the realm of the more established entities that everybody knows of. A lot of it is networking, and that process, obviously, you have your peer group around you, but then it's also incumbent that when you do have opportunities to meet with professionals already in the industry, that you are making some of those relationships and creating some of those relationships there. It takes some fostering of those too, and I'll be honest, there's a lot of students that I've met with in the past who they do a great job of that introductory, like coming up and talking with me and creating that initial sort of conversation, but then you need to follow up. And I'll be honest, I'm terrible at that. I'm so busy that oftentimes that it's something that I will just forget about or have 5 other things come up and just gets pushed down the list. But if you take the initiative and send me an email, then I'm liable to respond very much quicker than if it's on me to remember, hey, I need to email Lily, or hey, I need to email Ryan. But if you guys reach out to me and I see it pop up, I'm like, oh, okay, I need to respond to them, right? And I can do that in 5-10 minutes, whatever it might be. And sometimes that's what you need to do when you're trying to establish yourself within media or any other realm within sports. You might want to work in ticketing, or you might want to work in game ops, or you might want to work in event management. Whatever it might be, it's when those opportunities come up, you got to take that chance to create that relationship with someone already in the industry, because when you're either looking for that first job or you get that first job and then you're looking to move on up, it's those kind of people that are going to be the ones that are able to help you find that next chance or that next opportunity. So you have to be kind of persistent and sort of borderline annoying in some ways, but that's really, I think, the best way to sort of network yourself and make those connections while you're still in school. And then the last thing is, be as versatile as possible. I've told this story a lot in classes before, but when I left Central, I just wanted to be a writer. Like, that's all I cared about. I wanted to be a sports writer. That was it. There's so much that I should have done and could have done to make myself more well-rounded so that I could have been, attractive to all sorts of different industries when I left school. So if you want to work in sports media, that's great. Also learn how to do PR, also learn how to do event management, also learn how to do web design development, whatever the classes are called now. Learn all these other aspects, because learn photography, learn video production, because you never know what piece of that is going to be what gets you in the door. It might be, you might want to work in sports media, but what skill is going to be the one that actually gets you that opportunity to get into the industry and get into and start your professional career. So be as versatile and well-rounded as you can be. You still are going to have your specialization of what you truly want to do, but don't limit yourself just to that as you're going through things. Like, really try and be as well-rounded as you can and learn as many skills as you can while you're there, because again, what skill is going to be the one that lands you that job with Nike, or what skill is going to be the one that lands you that job with ESPN or whoever it might be. You just never know, but the more that you can put on that resume that you've done, the better chance you have of that happening.
And Tim, just as we do wrap up our podcast for today, I do have an interesting question for you. I've got one last one, and I'm kind of coming off the top of the dome here, because I've got another question that I wanted to ask you. Just kind of fun, out of left field, off the wall, past the real thinking questions. But I got to ask, Tim.
You're scaring me, Ryan.
What's the best uniform in all of sports?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh my God.
We're going to be here for another 30 minutes.
The best uniform in all of sports.
Yes, sir.
Oh, man, I did not expect that.
We didn't put that on the list. It was a surprise.
No, you didn't put that one on the list. I'm looking around at my walls going, do I have anything up here that can trigger a thought? Like, okay, I've got an old Sonics credential right here. So,
Okay.
I mean, the old white Sonics uniform that they wore basically from like the mid '70s until the early mid '90s that just said Sonics across. That was a great uniform. I liked that one. God, that's a good question.
Hey, that's what we're shooting
You're gonna.
for.
Yep.
I see. Here's the problem. I'm not coming up with a good answer right now, and then I'm gonna be thinking about this for the rest of the day, and then at like 2 a.m., it's gonna hit me, and I'm
Yep.
gonna wake up wide awake, and I'm gonna be like, "This is the best one," and then I'm not gonna have an outlet with which to share that to. So.
You can just email me, and then we'll put a thought bubble above your
Right.
head.
Right.
We'll edit it in, be like, his real answer was, and then it'll be good.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's
There
fair,
you
because I really don't have a good one. I mean, I love the Seahawks throwbacks. I think they're great. The Denver Broncos throwbacks are fantastic.
Yeah, that's a good one.
God, this is gonna bother me.
Feel free
okay.
to email me after. We'll figure out a way to
I
put
will.
it in.
I will. This is now my mission for the rest of the day. to
Yes.
figure out the best-
I'm going to get an email
my
at
favorite
like 3
uniform.
o'clock or 3 in the
Right.
morning.
Sounds like
Yep.
I found it.
Sounds like a great route for a follow-up, Tim.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That sounds good.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, that kind of concludes the interview questions. Do you have anything to add? Honest reflections, your reactions about the interview, anything that you want to add, really?
You guys asked great questions. I say too much. Let's see what else. No, this is awesome. I hope you guys have a lot more people on who can speak more eloquently about their experiences and about what they've gone through with their careers. I'm sort of unique in that I'm only worked in the media realm, but there's a lot of others who have come through Central, who are connected to the Northwest Center for Sport, and who can speak to their experiences working with, specific teams or organizations, who can speak to, what it's like to run a ticketing office or run, a multi-team, event, center or event space, or what game day operations are like, or even what it's like to run an NFL team, because you got one of those who's an assistant general manager for the Seahawks. So I hope you're able to get a lot more people on to speak around this, because I think sports is such a cool field and industry to work in, and there's so many different pieces to it that I don't think everyone fully understands all that it takes to go into running a team or working for a team or working at events, or in my business, or in my case, working in the media industry. That the more you can have on, I think it just opens up people's or students' thoughts about what their path could be and what their opportunities could be if they want to work in this industry, because it's a very competitive industry, but it's also a very cool industry to be able to say that you work in.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Tim, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time with us, and thanks for tuning into this episode of the Northwest Center for Sport podcast. My name is Lily Gould,
I am Ryan Gildersleeve.
and we'll see you next time.